buy now pay later is simply financing product that allows you to buy anything online through EMIs. Now it can be a 1 month later EMI, it can be 3 months, 6 months, 9 or 12 months, but basically allows you an affordability option to purchase something that you would otherwise not purchase uh, because it was inconvenient or because you didn't have the access to credit.
Hey Gaurav, thanks a lot for agreeing to do this. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Aviral. Thank you for having me here and looking forward to it too as well.
So Gaurav, would love to begin with early days, your journey growing up. Um, any influences that you had, which would have led to building a company? Anything in the family? Would love to learn about that, and going to college, your first jobs. Um,
Yeah,
if you could talk through that.
sure. No, so I was lucky enough to be born and kind of grown up in a joint family where there was a family business as well. So my dad, two brothers, and two cousins. The family business was Gokaldas Exports, which was the largest apparel manufacturing company in the country. And having from a very young age kind of witnessed how my dad and my uncles actually grew the business was really what inspired me in many ways to, at a later point in time, obviously, kind of to start my own business. Uh, it was a fairly large business that like I said, my dad kind of built, where we at a given point of time we had almost 50,000 people working in the company, and we were making garments for folks like Gap, Nike, Abercrombie. So pretty interesting business. I grew up. I spent a lot of my childhood, working in the office under my dad. And actually, once I graduated college in 2004, I spent about 6 years working in the business there, in the family business. And so I spent a lot of my time on a factory shop floor. I also learned how to stitch a garment. And so that was a real moment of pride for me when I could stitch my own shirt. Obviously, since then, I cannot do that anymore and I've forgotten that skill. But I think growing up there, watching what it takes to build a large business, watching them exit it to an IPO and then finally to a private equity player was a complete evolution of a business cycle that I saw that really got me engaged and excited. And as we exited the business to Blackstone in 2010, it really encouraged me to kind of go figure out what my next steps were and what I want to do in life. And so I said, I took a break. I said, let me go study. I went to Stanford, which is a graduate school of business there. I met my co-founder Shashank over there, and long story short, we both decided to come back to India in 2013 and start Capital Float.
Understand. I mean, that's a very unique journey. Any observations while you were helping Gokulas with scaling? I am guessing there was some inspiration for Capital Float in your experience there.
Yeah, so no, that's very true, right? Because when I was working with with Gokul Das, we used to come across a lot of small to medium businesses who were suppliers of ours, whether they would supply raw materials like buttons or zips or elastic or thread or whatever else they were supplying us, who constantly struggled for finance, right? And when you would speak to these people, you would realize that they had good underlying businesses, but always relied heavily on what I would say offline, typical traditional money lenders, couldn't really get the access to capital from banks, and could never really grow because of these reasons, right? And so this is a theme that kind of stuck with me as I went to business school and as I really reflected upon my experience at Gokuldas. And that was really, I would say, in some ways, the building blocks of how the entire journey and thought process of Capital Float came about. As to there is this massive opportunity in India. There are millions of small businesses who are underserved and have great underlying businesses, but rely on a very traditional source of capital rather than a formal financial institution for various reasons. And that really, like I said, became we went to the drawing board and said maybe that's the right place and the right business to start.
Got it. Um, how is the process of starting the company and the first couple of iterations essentially in figuring out that this is what you want to build?
Yeah, so you hear a lot of stories where founders have a particular idea, they are kind of passionate about it, go ahead and kind of start the business. With Shashank and me, it was a little different. Like I said, we graduated from business school, came back to India in 2013. The only thing we knew was that the two of us wanted to work together because obviously we liked each other's company and we had very different complementary skill sets. But we really didn't know what we wanted to start, right? And so this whole idea of SME financing was one amongst them. But we created a whole list of ideas back in 2013, and some of them were like very varied, from a preschool to looking at a fast food service kind of QSR, quick service restaurant, to apparel e-commerce, to looking at taxi hailing back then. So we actually came up with a list of about 40 ideas, and over the course of a year deep dove into each idea and came up with kind of pros and cons as to what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. And through a process of elimination actually really ended up kind of doing something in fintech and lending. And there are three things that really were core areas that we wanted to tick off for each idea, whether it would make the cut or not. One was simply, can this business scale, right? We were not interested in doing something small, or not interested in doing something that was more lifestyle. Nothing wrong with those businesses, but we just wanted to build something that could really scale fairly quickly. The second is, could really technology be a differentiator and an enabler? And the third, could it at least have some kind of impact in India that we were, that's something that we are passionate about. So any idea that kind of didn't meet these three criteria was automatically rejected. And like I said, fintech lending was obviously one that kind of ticked all three. And so it was around early 2014 when we kind of decided to take the plunge and go down this route.
Great. So would love to dive a bit more into your journey, and our topic for this episode is of course fintech lending, and would like to understand a bit more about uh, kind of some of the trends. Specifically with COVID, we've heard a lot about buy now, pay later. So can you tell us a bit about why you think this model has gained prominence, and what are some of the benefits of it?
Sure. So I'll just start with what buy now pay later is. So buy now pay later is simply a financing product that allows you to buy anything online through EMIs. Now it can be a 1 month later EMI, it can be 3 months, 6 months, 9 or 12 months, but basically allows you an affordability option to purchase something that you would otherwise not purchase uh, because it was inconvenient or because you didn't have the access to credit. Where this becomes really interesting is, and you guys all know these numbers, but I just kind of repeat them. Today, there are about 100 million online shoppers in the country, and only about 25 million of them actually have credit cards. And this number of credit carded population has been growing very, very slowly in our country for the last 7 to 10 years. And for various reasons, sometimes banks being conservative, sometimes the cost of running these kind of credit cards becomes very expensive for the banks. And so the growth on credit cards has been very, very low for a country that has a population size like India. And so when we looked at this opportunity, we said there is this massive 75 million opportunity that is shopping online today and not really doing it with credit. They use other great payment instruments like a debit card or a UPI. But if we could power credit for them, we could really see e-commerce grow into what the vision was for e-commerce in the country in the next 5 to 10 years. And so that was really the opportunity set that we really started Buy Now Pay Later with about 2.5 years ago, by partnering with folks like an Amazon and a Make My Trip.
So that was that opportunity that really sort of checked all those boxes that you described
Yeah.
earlier, and so you knew that this was the right problem for you guys to tackle. But since then, how has the model evolved for you guys, and how has Capital Float's strategy changed, and has COVID played a role?
Yeah, so like I said, we started life with about in 2014 being more of a SME lender, but in the last 2.5 years, the focus of the business really has been around consumer financing, and Buy Now Pay Later is the product that's really kind of where the focus of the company is today. Um, and while the business was obviously, the Buy Now Pay Later business was growing quite well and doing well even before COVID, what we saw during COVID actually really surprised us and really kind of made us double down on this product. So as the first wave of COVID hit, which was around March, April of 2020, we saw two very unique behaviors which were kind of expected when COVID hit. So obviously people were locked down and were not going shopping outside. A lot of the shopping kind of shifted online. And second, because obviously there were lockdowns and the country was going through an economic turmoil, people wanted to have access to credit and have a credit line that they could fall back on for any kind of essential or needy purchases that would really happen. And so what we saw is when we started life, when we started buy now pay later, 2 years ago. The first about year and a half, we acquired about 400,000 customers, doing a decent level of growth. But since COVID started till now, that 400,000 has gone to slightly over 2 million, and we are actually acquiring about 150,000 customers per month.
Wow. So really quite the impact.
Yeah.
Uh, but also this transition, I mean, you went from lending to SMEs to consumers. Was that like a deliberate decision, or did it sort of happen organically? Can you?
So we still definitely still lend to SMEs, but like I said, through COVID, once this opportunity kind of came up and really started growing, that's where we ended up spending a lot of our focus, because you sometimes you feel that there's an opportunity, it knocks on your door, you need to really just grab it with both hands and kind of run after it. And so that's really what happened.
Absolutely makes sense. So, would like to talk a bit about India's approach to household finances, and specifically, you recently launched, Walnut Prime. Can you tell us a bit about that, and what pain points you're solving for Indian consumers?
Yeah, so through Walnut is our app that actually allows you to kind of create budgets. It helps you manage your finances. You can decide how much you want to spend, how much you want to save. And so it's really one-stop destination for all your financial needs. And because we obviously have this unique insight into how people like to save or how they like to create budget or manage their expenses, we thought that the natural extension of Walnut as well as our buy now pay later product would be to allow people to get a larger loan, right? So typically buy now pay later product, the loan is 10-15,000 rupees and used only for online purchases. But obviously for many people a need will arise for a larger loan, whether that's for a healthcare emergency, that's a personal emergency, that's a wedding, education, or whatever may be the reason. So we said the natural extension obviously was to then provide larger ticket personal loans anywhere from, let's say, 50,000 to about 2 lakh rupees, in a very easy automated manner, that people can actually have access to another line of credit, or a rather larger line of credit, uh, at any point that they wanted. And so Walnut Prime was launched also about 2 years ago with that intent of allowing people to kind of have a digital credit card without necessarily having the physical form factor of a credit card in their wallets.
No, love that, a digital credit card. So, I mean, it's really more about kind of opening up that access to a whole bunch of people who didn't have access before. But wanted to, there are a lot of players in this space, and I just wanted to understand what makes you guys different and how are you thinking about the problem differently.
Yeah, so when it comes to buy now pay later, right? You're right. There are a lot of people who are trying to do this, and obviously we are one of them. I think there are three kind of things that we do uniquely, uh, that kind of makes our product stand out and see the growth that we've seen over the last year and a half. So the first is we actually acquire a customer with a very easy two-step kind of onboarding process for credit. Normally, I'm sure many people on this group have actually applied for loans and applied for credit, and see that the process is typically quite cumbersome, even with new age kind of fintech lending apps. But what we've been able to decide and kind of design is just by entering two fields, your PAN card and your Aadhaar card, you are actually able to get a loan while checking out online in under about 10 seconds, right? So the user experience, the speed at which we're able to onboard you with just within a couple of steps is the first kind of really USP as to why we believe the product is better and why that's actually scaling really well. The second differentiator is our ability and our partnership with large partners, right? So whether that's Amazon e-commerce, Make My Trip on travel, and many, many others, I think most people obviously shop on these large platforms, right? While the long tail in India is growing and is becoming very exciting, it may still take a few years for a lot of the smaller platforms to develop. And so we feel that the right place to really catch these customers is when they're on these large platforms. And there's a lot of trust that is built and associated with these platforms. So the ability to integrate with these platforms, to be the partner of choice for them, is something that we've been able to build from a tech capability point of view. And the third is, at the end of the day, no matter how efficient you create a lending product, it all boils down to how do you manage collections, how do you manage risk, and how do you manage NPA, because that is the most critical thing in the lending business. And that's something that's worked really, really well for us on this product, where even through the pandemic, we've been able to underwrite and prove the risk out in such a manner that today our product is probably best in class when it comes to an NPA, where we are hovering around about a 1.5 to 2% NPA on a product that is very quick, seamless, efficient, and completely unsecured. And actually, this number has been coming down steadily even through a COVID year, which has been a very economically challenging year for many people.
No, and I think there's a fascinating insight baked into that. The fact that you give people credit in a few seconds just when they're checking out, right? Which normally takes days. You fill out a form, wait for the bank to reply. And so it's, yeah, something that's difficult to miss. But I wanted to actually ask about another player, Klarna in Europe, who's been quite big in the space. Heard a lot about them. What are some of the differences between markets? Have they been an inspiration? Are there some kind of differences between your model and theirs?
Yeah, so if you look at the Klarna model, uh, it's a very interesting company, obviously. And uh, in India, you had an amazingly successful company called Bajaj Finance that has done something similar in the offline world, right? So if you go to a Chroma or you go to any other kind of large electronic store or any store, you can always buy something offline through EMIs, because a Bajaj Finance has a guy there and helps you kind of again amortize a payment into several payments, because they have someone there that can underwrite you and provide you that credit very quickly. In Europe, that model of the Bajaj Finance didn't really exist, and so Klarna was one of the first ones that actually kind of did this both in the online and offline space. And so obviously, it's seeing a lot of great momentum and traction. If I just look at how that's playing out in India with us, right, we are obviously in many ways take inspiration from what Bajaj has done in the offline space and try to do it on the online space. Obviously, the product discoverability becomes more harder when there isn't a person at the store. So you are trying to fight for real estate on an online platform and trying to catch the customer at the right point. And so that unique ability is something that we've been able to develop. And again, we take inspiration from companies, whether that's a Klarna, that's an Affirm in the US, or even a Bajaj Finance in India.
It's not just one source, but yeah, I mean, many different models and kind of customizing it to your particular to what you're seeing with your users. And that's something I want to ask you a bit more about. How do you understand your users? Like, what metrics are you looking at? How do you, uh,
Yeah.
kind of make the most of the opportunity, as you put it earlier?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? So I would say there is the metrics that we look at the time of onboarding a customer, and what is their demographic profile when we underwrite them and first give them the loan. And then there's the ongoing relationship with the customer. So when we actually onboard a customer and we take the decision to provide them a loan, we rely on a lot of interesting demographic information, right? So for example, 50% of our customers live outside the top 10 cities of India. Uh, we are today active in about almost 14,000 pin codes in the country. And so we see a very wide geographic distribution of the customers that are coming through to us. And like I said, 50% outside the top 10 cities, and another, I would say, almost totally 70% actually living in tier two, tier three towns. And so this entire rise of digital penetration, internet penetration, and digital credit that we've always heard about in the smaller towns and cities is actually happening, and we are seeing it on a daily basis. The second thing is a large percentage of our customers, again, probably north of 50-60%, are actually banking outside the top four private banks, right? So whether that's a HDFC, Kotak, an Axis, ICICI, etc., right? 40% of them are actually outside these banks. So we would think that these banks would control a large market share, which they do. But at least the customer base that we are attracting is typically banking outside these platforms. Uh, a very small percentage of our borrowers, unfortunately, are women, and that's probably around 8 to 10%. And that's a number that we'd obviously like to and hope to increase. And as the GDP of the country grows, we would like to see a lot more kind of online shoppers and digital credit seekers who are women. And that's something we want to kind of obviously engage and kind of grow. And another unique pattern is about 15 to 20% of our customers have never taken a loan in their life before. So they don't have a presence on the bureau, they don't have a score. And so that becomes, again, a very interesting opportunity for us to be the first port of call for them, right? So these are some of the interesting demographic information that we see about our customers as and when we onboard them. And once they are our customers, I think the most unique insight we get is in obviously the number of purchases and how many times they use our product. So a lot of our active customers today are using this product and shop almost 30 to 35 times in a year. So this product they really kind of love and use it as their most preferred payment or credit choice when it comes to shopping online.
Those are great signs that any founder is looking for, signs of some amazing traction. But wanted to understand a bit more about how you mentioned this demographic, right, of people that don't have any data in the credit bureaus. How do you go about evaluating them? And
That's really the USP and the secret sauce of the business, right? So we have our own kind of proprietary data sets that we get through various sources, obviously user given, and with obviously the right permissions and privacy, etc. And we've built a very interesting income estimation model. So we are able to predict a person's income as and when they apply for a loan, even without asking them any details about their income or salary or anything else, right? And the size of the line that we give or the size of the credit we give is a function of what we believe their income is to be with a certain degree of accuracy. And so that has been a very interesting way in terms of how we underwrite customers, especially when there is not enough data, whether on the bureau or anywhere else, to kind of really underwrite them. So like I said, about 20% don't have a bureau score, 80% do. But even for that 80%, we see a lot of customers typically don't have that much information in the bureau. So where there is a bureau, we obviously rely on the bureau. But even where there is no bureau, we kind of build our income estimation models to really be able to acquire the right customers and provide them the right credit that they need.
Got it. No, super helpful. And maybe we can deep dive a little bit more into that. I think a few folks would love to understand how you are managing your NPAs. What's the process there? I know it's a secret sauce, but in general, if you can talk about it on a high level.
Yeah, sure. So there are two things when it comes to managing NPAs, right? One is how do you underwrite the risk when you acquire a customer, which I spoke about around the income estimation model. But the more important thing is really collections, right? And this is a lesson sometimes we've learned the hard way. uh, Whether you're a fintech lending startup, whether you're a bank, whether you're an NBFC, if you're in the lending space and you don't know how to do collections well, you are never going to keep your NPAs low. And like I said, we sometimes had to learn this the hard way. But we have built very unique kind of approach to collections where we built a technology stack that makes our collectors, whether that's someone on the phone or someone on the field, far more efficient. But we've also kind of taken the ownership and built out a in-house collections team, a composition, etc. That obviously keeps in mind what is important to the customer, but also kind of make sure that we are hitting all the numbers and targets that we have when it comes to collections. So any lending company or lending startup that says they don't do collections or they outsource collections is not a model that I would typically believe in, especially in a country like India.
Got it. And that's a very interesting insight. A lot of lending companies just focus on dispersal. Very few focus on collections. That is interesting. What does the immediate future for you guys look like? What's the long term future? What are your key goals and what are you optimizing for at this point?
Yeah, so I would say three things, right? One is we've seen, like I said, some fantastic growth over the last 15 to 18 months. And so I think the first kind of target for us is obviously to kind of keep that momentum, keep that growth going, at least for, obviously for the near future, but obviously for the midterm and long term as well. So we want to kind of go from, let's say, a 2 million customer base to a much larger customer base and grow that at least 2 to 3 times in the coming 12 to 18 months. So keep adding more customers and being able to provide them this credit choice of the product that they really like. The second is, again, I've said this a few times, but in the lending business, especially during now with COVID and all signs point, there will probably be a third wave, making sure that collections, making sure that NPAs really stay at the number of this 1.5 to 2% that we've kept it at, to make sure that kind of stays there. And the third is just providing this product across many, many platforms, right? So we are tying up with many platforms outside the two that I spoke about, and making sure this product actually exists on almost every online platform that we can reach and partner with.
Understand. Makes sense. And any last closing insights on how you have essentially got your teams working in place, things like that. How is that working out?
Yeah, so obviously when lockdown one happened, it was challenging. We had people across the country in about 20 cities, um, and our instant reaction obviously was to make sure everyone was first safe and they were able to, and had enough infrastructure to be able to kind of work at home. And while we've obviously, that is a solved problem over the last year, I think the challenge that we are now dealing with is how do you deal with fatigue at home, right? People have been working at home mostly for the last now almost a year and a half, and it seems like this is going to continue for a few more months, right? So, how do you keep it engaging? How do you keep people exciting? How do you kind of make sure that you are able to maintain culture and all the things that I'm sure every startup founder is thinking about during these times when their people kind of are working at home? A second, I would say, not even a second, probably the first priority right now for us is to kind of make sure that all our teams are vaccinated and safe. So we've seen some good progress in the last couple of weeks where we've been able to vaccinate uh, through specific vaccination drives for our company. Almost, I would say, 60-70% of our company strength. And hopefully, in the next month or so, we can get almost everybody and their families vaccinated, right? And that's the only way out of this COVID mess. And hopefully, I'm optimistic that in the next few months we can have people back at office once we can kind of get them all vaccinated. So, like I said, providing infrastructure work from home is almost table stakes, but now getting people back to work by making sure they're all vaccinated is what the priority for the company is.
Got it. No, thank you for sharing that, and I think that will be very helpful for a lot of aspiring founders as well as founders who joined in. Um, One question we ask all our guests is, what's one piece of unfiltered feedback that you've received in your journey as a founder, or in your career? Um, we like it if it is honest, maybe even borderline, something like you'd not want to listen to. But if you could share that with us, is the reason why we call the podcast Founders Unfiltered.
Sure. I'll give you the most unfiltered version, so excuse my language and my French. But
Sure.
when we were first starting Capital Float in 2014, we pitched to many VCs and investors, right? And many of them obviously said no. But there was one interesting gentleman who I will not name, but he said that, Shashank, you and Gaurav have returned from Stanford, you'll have spent time in the US. You guys cannot be the assholes that are needed to do collections in India. And this was his exact line. And for a long time, to be honest, I never truly understood what that meant. And we built the company from 2014 to 2018. And I would always go back to that sentence. I'm like, yeah, we are doing okay. Yes, our NPS could be better, but I never really realized what that gentleman actually meant. And as I've looked back over the last 2 years, where I have been very personally involved in underwriting, in collections, and how our NPS have actually come down, I've gotten my hands very dirty because of obviously the ILFS financial crisis and then COVID, and really kind of getting into the weeds and nitty gritties of collections. It became very clear to me that what is really needed, the mental aptitude, the physical aptitude, the strength, the ability to make sure that you run an effective collections force. And that advice has really started to play out for me over the last 2 years, right? So, like I said, something that somebody told us which we didn't understand and probably didn't even listen to for the first 3-4 years of our business. But as we've kind of had to roll up our sleeves and do things the hard way, probably the best advice that somebody gave to us was this sentence, and that's always going to stick with me as long as I'm in the lending business.
No, that's amazing and very honest, I think. So thanks a lot, Gaurav, for this conversation. We'll open it up for Q&A. Thank you for taking our time to speak to us.
Thank you folks. Thank you, Aviral. Thank you, Mazin.